Sir, I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them. The words sliced through the night air, loud and sharp, like the sirens that had just gone quiet. Marcus Johnson stood frozen on the driveway of his new home, still holding the cardboard box labeled, Books, Naomi. A police officer, tall, white, with a tight jaw and a hand already near his holster, stepped forward. A second officer circled behind Marcus like he was cornering something dangerous. Elaine screamed from the porch. What's going on? This is our house. Ma'am, stay back. The second officer barked. Flashlight pointed at her face. Naomi, barefoot and in pajamas, clutched her mother's waist in silence, her eyes wide, confused. Marcus didn't move. He was dressed in slacks, a tucked-in Oxford shirt, and leather loafers. His voice, steady but low, tried to pierce the absurdity. Officer, I live here. We just moved in today. That's my wife and that's my daughter. I'm unloading books. We received a report of suspicious activity, the first officer snapped, eyes scanning the open trunk of Marcus's SUV like it held weapons instead of throw pillows and college textbooks. You were seen talking to someone near your vehicle and carrying boxes at a late hour. That was my friend Andre, Marcus answered slowly. He was helping me unload. He left 20 minutes ago. Do you have ID? The officer demanded. Marcus glanced at the box still in his hands. It's in my wallet. Inside. Don't move. The officer stepped forward, took the box from Marcus's arms, dropped it onto the driveway, and motioned to his partner. The second cop approached with cautious hands and frisked Marcus right there under the streetlight, palms dragging down his sides, patting his ankles. Naomi turned her face into her mother's chest. Across the street, behind slightly parted curtains, Richard Coleman watched. His hand still hovered over the cordless phone. A smirk flickered at the corner of his lips. One of the officers finally pulled Marcus's wallet from his back pocket, opened it, and stared at the Illinois driver's license inside. There was no reaction on his face, no apology. This checks out, he said to his partner. Of course it does, Elaine said bitterly. You just humiliated a man in front of his family, in front of his home. We're just doing our job, came the reply, flat and cold. Better safe than sorry. The officers turned without another word, walking back to their cruisers like nothing had happened. The lights flashed once more, then silence. Marcus stood still. His box lay on the ground, pages of a Toni Morrison novel now visible under the streetlight. Naomi finally looked up at her father. Why did they think you were a criminal? Elaine answered before Marcus could. Because someone thinks he doesn't belong here. Across the street, Richard let the curtain fall back into place. 30 seconds. That was all it took to stain the first night in a place they hoped would be different. The next morning, the air in Maplewood Hills felt just as clean, just as crisp. But inside the Johnsons' house, nothing felt untouched. Marcus stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee gone cold. Elaine sat silently at the breakfast table, scrolling through her phone, occasionally pausing to stare at nothing. Naomi was upstairs, door closed. The silence wasn't heavy, it was sharp, cutting. You should report it, Elaine finally said, eyes not leaving the screen. Call the department, file a complaint. Marcus didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, looked across the street at the beige colonial with the perfect hedges. He didn't need to see Richard's face to know who had called. It didn't matter that no one had said a name. He knew. And say what? Marcus said softly. That a neighbor saw a black man carrying boxes and got scared? That police came, guns close to their holsters, and made me prove I exist. Elaine's voice was firmer. You don't have to prove anything. That's the point. But Marcus's silence was louder than her words. Later that afternoon, Naomi returned from her walk to the park. She tossed her phone on the kitchen counter and opened the fridge with a sigh. Some girl asked me if we're related to Kanye West, she said, half laughing, half exhausted. Said she thought it was cool we moved in, but that her dad was worried about property values. Marcus turned, confused. She said that. Not in those words, Naomi shrugged. But you could tell. Marcus looked at Elaine, who just shook her head. The first week moved in slow friction. The neighbors waved with strained smiles. At the HOA meeting, Elaine introduced herself and was met with polite nods. No one asked questions. No one invited coffee. Naomi sat alone at lunch the first few days until a quiet girl named Jess started sitting with her. Everyone's weird here, Jess admitted on Thursday. It's like everyone's pretending to be perfect and they're scared you'll notice they're not. By Saturday, Marcus had his office mostly set up. The walls still smelled of fresh paint. His laptop glowed with emails from attorneys, financial analysts, and board members, all addressed to Mr. Johnson, all carrying the kind of weight that could shift entire companies. Yet none of his neighbors knew who he was, and that was fine. He preferred it. What wasn't fine was how Richard Coleman kept watching, always from a distance. When Marcus jogged early in the morning, Richard happened to be at his mailbox. When he returned in the evening, Richard stood watering his lawn, every single evening, always watching. On Sunday afternoon, Marcus walked out to get the mail and found Richard standing just beyond the sidewalk, pretending to inspect a street lamp post. "Evening," Richard said, finally meeting Marcus's eyes. "Settling in okay?" "We are," Marcus said, matching the tone but not the warmth. "Good. Good to hear. Always nice when folks who move in try to, keep the peace. Some people move out here and forget where they are." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm very aware of where I am." Richard tilted his head. "Just saying. It's a close-knit community. People notice things. And sometimes, they notice wrong." The silence between them pulsed. Then Marcus took his mail and walked back to his door. No raised voices. No insults. But every word had teeth. That night, Marcus sat alone in his office. Lights dimmed. He opened an old file, notes on the internal culture at Northwell Development Group, leadership evaluations, and one name marked with a yellow tag, Richard Coleman. Marcus's eyes didn't blink for several seconds. He closed the file. He leaned back in his chair and whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Let's see who you really are." The glass walls of the Northwell Development Group's Chicago headquarters reflected the city's winter sun like mirrors of steel and ambition. Inside, the tension was different, corporate, restrained, sharpened by whispers. Richard Coleman adjusted his tie for the third time before stepping into the boardroom. The email had come late the night before. Mandatory leadership restructuring meeting. Attendance required. Something about new capital, new investors, possible leadership shifts. His name wasn't on the rumor lists, but he felt exposed. On the glossy table, senior executives murmured and sipped coffee from porcelain cups. The CFO, and Briggs, nodded at him curtly. She used to smile. Today she didn't. He took his seat and avoided looking nervous. When the door opened, no one breathed. The chairman of the board entered, followed by a man in a tailored navy suit and calm footsteps. A man Richard recognized before his brain could accept it. Marcus Johnson, walking with unbothered poise. The same Marcus he had called the cops on 3 weeks ago. The man who unloaded boxes at night. The one whose daughter stood on her porch while her father was searched like a suspect. Marcus didn't look at Richard. Not directly. He sat at the head of the table. The chairman remained standing. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. As many of you know, the firm has recently undergone a significant shift in ownership. We're pleased to announce that Marcus Johnson is now the majority shareholder and will serve as president of the board and interim CEO." A collective stillness settled like fog. Richard didn't move. Couldn't. His eyes flicked to Marcus, who now finally met his gaze. Not with anger. Not with revenge. Just a devastating calm. The kind of calm that says, "I didn't forget." Marcus spoke, voice steady. "I've been observing this company for nearly 2 years, analyzing performance, culture, and leadership. And while the numbers are strong, certain patterns concerned me, particularly around internal equity, implicit bias, and behavior inconsistent with the values we claim to uphold." He paused. "I've also recently moved into a neighborhood where I had the opportunity to witness, firsthand, How unspoken attitudes manifest in real life. A silence stretched. Richard's chest felt tight. It reminded me, Marcus continued, that professionalism without humanity is simply performance, that titles mean nothing if integrity is lacking, and that what people do when they think no one's watching matters most. No names, no accusations, just truth stripped of drama. Richard swallowed hard. He wasn't fired. Not that day, but something deeper broke. His authority, his image, the thin shell of superiority he wore like a second skin. In the days that followed, his team grew colder. Emails came slower. He was removed from strategic meetings, reassigned to operational oversight. Still employed, but no longer relevant. At Maplewood Hills, he watered the lawn less. The greetings grew awkward. Naomi passed him on her bike without a glance. Elaine never returned his waves. Marcus never mentioned the night. Never acknowledged the police, the humiliation. He didn't need to, because the silence that followed was louder than any confrontation. And Richard heard it every single day. Richard Coleman began arriving late to work. Not enough for HR to notice, but enough for the message to be clear. He was unraveling slowly and silently. His once frequent meetings were now handled by juniors, his name quietly removed from press releases. No one said it out loud, but he knew Marcus had dismantled his status without a single confrontation. At home, the distance between him and his wife, Karen, grew. She asked questions he didn't want to answer. "Why did you call the police that night, Richard?" she asked over dinner, her tone controlled but icy. He didn't look up. "I thought something was wrong. You didn't even go over to speak to him. You just assumed." "I was protecting the neighborhood," he said weakly. Karen pushed her plate away. "No, you were protecting something else. And now you're the one people avoid." Richard didn't respond. That silence followed him everywhere now. At home, at work, at the grocery store where even familiar faces offered only polite nods. Meanwhile, across the street, life in the Johnson household settled into something normal. Naomi made the varsity speech team, her name announced over the school intercom. Elaine organized a book club that met every other Thursday, drawing in neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid them. Marcus was rarely home before dark, but when he was, he grilled on the back patio and waved at children riding bikes down the sidewalk. He was present but not loud, visible but never theatrical, a presence that no longer needed to prove itself. One Saturday afternoon, Richard sat on his porch watching Marcus trim his hedges with methodical care. There was something maddening about how ordinary he looked, like nothing had happened, like that night meant nothing. Richard stood, crossed the street, and stopped at the edge of Marcus's lawn. "Do you have a minute?" Marcus glanced up, sweat glistening on his forehead, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. "Sure." Richard hesitated, then stepped onto the grass. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice tight. "That night, I made a call. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong." Marcus didn't stop trimming. "You called the police because you didn't recognize me, because I didn't fit." Richard nodded. "I see that now." Marcus paused, finally turning to face him. "And what do you expect from me, Richard?" "Nothing. Just, I needed to say it." A long beat passed. "Apology accepted," Marcus said. "But forgiveness doesn't erase the consequence." "I know," Richard said quietly. "I've been living it." Marcus nodded once, returned to his hedges, and Richard walked back across the street with nothing else to say. That night, Karen left the bedroom light on long after Richard had gone to sleep in the guest room. On her nightstand sat a half-read copy of Between the World and Me. Down the block, Naomi practiced a speech in front of her mirror. "We are not responsible for how others see us," she read aloud, "but we are responsible for how we respond." Marcus, in his office, answered emails with the calm authority of a man no longer underestimated. The neighborhood had shifted subtly but undeniably, and though no one spoke of it, everyone felt it. The presence of a man who had been wrongly judged and never retaliated only revealed what was already there. Spring arrived quietly in Maplewood Hills. The trees bloomed in soft pinks and whites, and the air carried that restless warmth that made people linger on porches longer than usual. Children chalked rainbows on sidewalks. Lawns were mowed with fresh determination, and the Johnsons, once regarded with suspicion, now moved through the neighborhood like they'd always belonged. Elaine's book club overflowed into folding chairs on the front lawn. Naomi was elected student council vice president and gave a speech on representation in the arts that made her principal cry. And Marcus had nothing to prove anymore. At Northwell Development Group, his leadership was quiet but decisive. He cut unnecessary bonuses, restructured hiring practices, and implemented diversity audits that made some board members uncomfortable but brought results no one could deny. During one board meeting, someone casually asked where he lived. "Maplewood Hills," he said with a slight smile. "It's a good place. Teaches you things." Richard Coleman no longer worked at Northwell. After being reassigned 3 times and passed over for 2 promotions, he quietly resigned. No farewell email. No party. Just an empty office by Monday morning. Karen stayed. Their marriage, though fractured, was not broken. One morning, she left a note beside his coffee. "You can still unlearn." That same week, Richard passed Naomi at the grocery store. She saw him first. "Hi, Mr. Coleman," she said kindly. And though her tone held no weight, her grace felt heavier than any consequence he had ever faced. Richard nodded. Naomi. It was the first time he'd said her name. The neighborhood never spoke of the incident again. Not because they forgot, but because forgetting would mean learning nothing. Instead, things simply changed. People invited each other in. Conversations lingered. Barriers cracked. One Sunday evening, Marcus stood by his mailbox as a moving truck pulled into the empty house 2 doors down. A family stepped out, 2 parents and a boy around 10. The father glanced over, cautious. Marcus raised his hand in a warm wave. "Need a hand with anything?" The man hesitated, then smiled. "That'd be great." And just like that, a new beginning took root. In this small corner of Illinois, something had shifted, quietly, meaningfully. Not because someone demanded it, but because someone chose not to become what had been thrown at them. Because dignity, when held firm, can change the air around it. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. It means a lot. Now I'm curious. Where are you listening from?